My name is Sophia Bennett. I'm 59 years old, and on the 22nd of December, I stood in my kitchen in Madison, Wisconsin, with my phone pressed to my ear while my brother calmly explained that Christmas Eve at the family house had become more of a high-level networking night, and that my presence would probably make everyone uncomfortable. He said it gently, almost professionally, like he was canceling a meeting instead of cutting me out of my own family. I remember staring at the framed photo on my counter while he spoke. In it, I was younger, laughing, flower on my cheek. Everyone crowded around me like I still belonged at the center of that picture. By the time the call ended, I no longer felt like a person in that frame. I felt like something someone had edited out. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just said, "I understand," even though I understood far more than he realized. He thought he was pushing aside an older sister who no longer mattered. What he didn't know was that I had spent 25 years building the company he now used as a stage, and I had finally stopped confusing blood with loyalty. I spent Christmas Eve alone in my apartment. Then, just after midnight, my parents called, their voices shaking, asking me what was on the news. Before I tell you why, tell me something first. What time is it, where you are, and where are you watching from? I always wonder how far a story like this can travel. When people hear what happened later, they always assume the betrayal started with one dramatic moment. One signature, one lie, one dinner table explosion. It didn't. It started the way family betrayals usually start, small enough to dismiss, repeated long enough to normalize. I founded FinGuard 25 years earlier with two other risk analysts in a rented office above a shuttered furniture store on the east side of Madison. We were building fraud detection architecture for mid-size financial institutions long before that phrase sounded glamorous enough for investors to repeat in podcasts. I wrote the first core detection models myself, lived on gas station coffee, slept under my desk twice a week, and learned very early that when a woman builds something from the ground up, people admire her right up until the moment they can imagine taking it from her. My brother Ryan joined the company much later, after business school, after polished suits, after learning how to smile with all his teeth while saying absolutely nothing. He was 10 years younger than me, charming in rooms where I was direct, quick with people in ways I never cared to be. At first, I was proud of him. I thought he would strengthen what I had built. Instead, he studied it. He learned which investors responded to confidence more than competence, which board members preferred a clean story over a complicated truth, and which family members could be trained to repeat his version of reality if he fed it to them slowly enough. The first real warning came at a winter cabin weekend in Door County. He called it a family reset, said we all needed time away from phones and city noise. My parents came up from Florida, and for one fragile evening, it almost felt real. Wine by the fire, card games, old stories, the kind of warmth that makes you ignore the splinter sliding into your skin. After dinner, Ryan drifted beside me on the deck while snow blew off the lake and asked about the compliance engine I had been developing in silence for 2 years. He framed it like admiration. "Soph, how are you getting the model to flag layered behavior patterns without drowning analysts in false positives?" It was the kind of question only someone paying close attention would ask. I answered more than I should have. Not source code, not enough to replicate it cleanly, but enough to sketch the architecture. I remember seeing the reflection of his phone screen in the glass door for half a second before he pocketed it. At the time, I told myself I was imagining it. Weeks later, I found phrases from that conversation in an internal strategy memo that had my brother's name all over it and mine nowhere. Not identical, not enough for a simple accusation, but close enough to make my stomach drop. When I confronted him, he smiled and said we were aligned thinkers. That was his favorite trick. He never denied the theft. He dissolved it, turned it into overlap, synergy, shared vision. Then he got to my parents before I did. Suddenly, I was hearing that I had become difficult, territorial, unwilling to share, maybe a little bitter about getting older in a young industry. My mother asked me why I couldn't just be happy Ryan was good with people. My father said I had always been brilliant but lacked polish. Lacked polish. I had built the machine they were now applauding, and somehow the family conversation had become about my tone. What made it worse was that part of me still wanted to believe I was overreacting. That is the cruelty of betrayal by family. Your instincts scream long before your heart will testify. So I started documenting quietly. Email threads, meeting notes, time-stamped development logs, repository snapshots, voice memos after every strange conversation. I met with an intellectual property attorney in Milwaukee under the excuse of a compliance conference and spent 4 straight hours creating the paper trail I should have created much earlier. He told me something I still remember word for word. The most dangerous thief is the one who believes access is ownership. I signed every document with shaking hands, not because I doubted Ryan anymore, but because I hated what accepting the truth meant. It meant my brother did not simply want success. He wanted a version of success where I became invisible inside my own life. And still, because families train us to hope against evidence, I gave him one more chance. I agreed to attend a private strategy meeting at Fingard and kept my explanation high level. I never gave him the proprietary framework. I never gave him the model weights or training pathways. But I underestimated how much a clever opportunist can steal from edges, structure, and confidence alone. He did not need the whole thing. He only needed enough to sell the illusion that it was already his. If you have ever been made to feel paranoid for protecting what you built, you know the loneliness of that stage. You begin asking yourself whether you are cold, selfish, ungenerous. In truth, you are usually just standing alone a few minutes ahead of the lie. The moment I stopped doubting myself arrived in Chicago in November, though I was not supposed to be there. Ryan told me the annual investor gala was a closed-door event. Routine. Nothing strategic. Mostly networking and donor maintenance. I might have believed him if he had not looked so pleased while saying it. That night, I was in my apartment reheating soup I barely wanted when a former colleague texted me a LinkedIn livestream link with one message. "Were you aware of this?" I clicked, and there he was on a stage under sapphire lighting with the Fingard logo spinning behind him, accepting an Industry Innovation Award for a transformational predictive compliance engine that was unmistakably based on the system I had built. He did not say my name once. He thanked the board, the advisory team, his wife, even our parents for teaching him resilience. Then he clicked through slides that made my chest go cold. Not just broad concepts this time. He had my structural language, my flagging hierarchy, my prioritization logic, even one visual metaphor I had used in a private note months earlier, comparing hidden financial risk to weather forming below the radar line. I sat frozen on my couch while the comments flooded the live stream. Visionary, brilliant, future of compliance. And then the camera cut to the banquet tables, where my parents were smiling like they had personally engineered him. That was the night something in me hardened, not into rage. Rage burns too hot and too fast. What settled into me was precision. I called my attorney first. Then I called a journalist I trusted, a woman in New York I had met years before on a panel about regulatory ethics and invisible labor in tech. Her name was Tessa Monroe, and she had the kind of mind that did not get seduced by charm. I told her I was not ready to speak on record yet, but I wanted her to understand what I had. By the end of that call, she had gone very quiet. Then she said, "Sophia, if your documentation is what you say it is, this is not a family dispute. This is a fraud story wearing a family costume." That sentence changed everything for me. At the same time, Ryan escalated the isolation at home. Thanksgiving approached, and I heard nothing. No invitation, no schedule, no vague excuse, nothing at all. On Thanksgiving morning, I opened social media and found a professionally shot carousel of my family gathered at our parents' rented lake house in Florida. Matching linen, curated laughter, candles, expensive tableware, and Ryan at the center carving turkey like some benevolent king. My mother had captioned it, "Grateful for the ones who show up for each other." I stared at that sentence for a very long time. It is amazing how cruelty becomes most visible when someone decorates it. That same weekend, I made the real decision. I would not only expose what Ryan had done, I would remove the ground beneath the version of reality he was standing on. I called two senior engineers who had quietly left Fingard over the past 3 years after complaining, off the record, that leadership kept burying the people doing actual work. One was in Minneapolis, the other in Denver. Both had watched Ryan rise by presenting other people's labor like polished strategy. Both said yes before I finished my offer. Within 2 weeks, we had the skeleton of a new company, Ledger North. Not flashy, not sleek, just honest. We designed it around the engine Ryan had tried to parade as his breakthrough. Except this time it would go to market under the name of the person who had actually built it. People like to imagine revenge as one explosive act, but the most effective revenge is often administrative. Contracts, logs, witnesses, backups, dates. If anger is thunder, documentation is climate. By early December, Tessa had seen enough evidence to begin building her piece under embargo. My attorney had letters ready for the board, for investors, for Fingard's outside counsel. I had secured independent validation of my original development timeline from 2 academic specialists and 3 archived test environments. There would be no misunderstanding defense left when this broke. Then Ryan called 3 days before Christmas and told me not to come. He said the house would be full of clients, board contacts, people who might feel awkward given my recent tension with him. Recent tension. As if I were the social problem in a room full of theft. I listened until he finished, then asked one question. "Does Mom know you're saying this to me?" He paused a little too long before answering. We all agreed it would be easier. Key. That was the moment I understood something I had resisted for years. Ryan might have started the betrayal, but my parents had chosen the comfort of his version. Sometimes the deepest wound is not that one person harms you. It is that everyone else finds it more convenient to call the harm complicated. After that call, I sent Tessa a 2-word message. Green light. I authorized my attorney to deliver the investor packets at 11:50 p.m. on Christmas Eve. I scheduled Ledger North's quiet launch for 12:01 a.m., and then I made dinner for 1. Sat in my apartment with a glass of red wine I barely tasted, and waited for midnight to tell the truth. Christmas Eve was almost unbearably ordinary until it wasn't. That is what I remember most. The dishwasher humming, snow collecting on the balcony rail, a single candle burning beside the sink because I couldn't stand how empty the apartment looked without some small act of defiance against the dark. Around 9:30, I almost called everything off. Not because Ryan deserved mercy, but because I suddenly pictured the blast radius too clearly. My parents waking up to headlines. Fingard employees who had nothing to do with this losing security. My niece hearing adults whisper. When justice arrives, it never knocks only on the guilty door. Then my phone buzzed with a message from a junior analyst still at Fingard, someone I had mentored years earlier. He had sent a photo from the Christmas Eve party at my parents' house. Ryan was standing in front of a projection screen, giving what looked like another investor mini presentation between cocktails, and behind him, in giant blue letters, were the words, "The Future of Financial Trust. Ryan Bennett. My engine. My years. My work. His name." Something inside me became very calm after that. I typed back, "Thank you. Delete this message." Then I closed my eyes, breathed once, and let the clock keep moving. At 11:57 p.m., Tessa texted me that the article was loaded and scheduled. At 11:58, my attorney confirmed the board packet had been delivered digitally and physically. At 11:59, Ledger North's website went live in stealth mode. I stood by the window, watching snow fall between the buildings, and thought about the first winter I had built FinGuard from a folding table and a borrowed server. Thought about every room where I had been told to smile more, simplify more, step back more, trust more. Thought about every time I had accepted being diminished in order to keep the peace. Midnight came quietly. Then my phone detonated. First, a string of email notifications, then text messages, then missed calls stacking so fast the screen blurred. Tessa's article hit exactly at 12 a.m. The headline was brutal in the cleanest possible way. FinGuard executive accused of misrepresenting Sister's proprietary risk engine as company innovation. The piece contained timeline evidence, internal documents, investor materials, expert validation, and a statement from my counsel confirming formal action. It did not read like gossip. It read like gravity. 1 minute later, Ledger North's launch statement posted publicly with my name attached as founder and lead architect. At 12:04, the first investor statement hit. At 12:06, Ryan called. I let it ring twice before answering. The first thing I heard was noise. Voices, glass, footsteps, the unmistakable sound of a room collapsing socially in real time. Then Ryan, breathless and furious. "What did you do?" I remember looking at my reflection in the black window as I answered. "I told the truth." He started shouting immediately. Defamation, malice, family, timing, Christmas. He kept grabbing at every moral word available because facts were no longer on his side. Then I heard my father in the background asking what was happening, and my mother saying my name like it had just become dangerous in her mouth. At 12:11, my father called me from his own phone. I answered because I wanted to hear who he was when Ryan was no longer narrating the world for him. His voice was shaking. "Sophia," he said, "what's on the news?" There was a lifetime inside that question. Not, "What happened?" Not, "Did Ryan do this?" Not, "Are you okay?" Just the stunned confusion of people who have mistaken comfort for truth for so long they cannot recognize reality when it finally walks in uninvited. I told him to read the article fully before saying another word to me. My mother got on the line next, already crying, asking why I would do this tonight of all nights. I said, "Because Ryan thought tonight would protect him." Then I hung up. More calls came. Investors, former colleagues, reporters, 2 board members, 1 woman from compliance who simply texted, "I knew it." And beneath all of it was a strange ache I had not planned for. Not regret. Something harder to categorize. Grief, maybe, for the final death of the fantasy that my family would one day correct itself without being forced. Revenge stories are satisfying when told in one sentence. In real life, the victory arrives carrying a body. By 1 a.m., FinGuard's emergency statement had been released. By 1:20, Ryan had deleted his social media. By 2, the board had suspended him pending investigation. I sat on my couch in the dark with my shoes still on and realized no one had asked me the question that actually mattered. How many times had I tried to solve this quietly before I set fire to the lie? The next 72 hours were worse for Ryan than anything I could have invented, because public humiliation is one thing, institutional consequences are another. FinGuard's board moved with the speed of people who suddenly understand their own names might be attached to the wreckage. By Christmas afternoon, Ryan was placed on immediate administrative leave. By the morning after that, the company's largest prospective partnership froze negotiations. Within the week, 2 investor groups threatened legal action over misrepresentation during fundraising conversations. Every confident little shortcut Ryan had taken to turn my work into his narrative became a breadcrumb trail straight to his own collapse. He tried apology first in the modern way, carefully drafted, vague, bloodless, a statement on LinkedIn about communication breakdowns, shared development environments, and deep regret for how certain contributions may have been perceived. It lasted 38 minutes before backlash forced it down. Then came the second version, written by someone smart enough to know he had no room left for fog. He admitted he had presented work derived from my architecture. He admitted he had excluded me from strategic conversations. He even admitted that personal family dynamics had shaped professional decisions. What he still would not say was the central truth, that he had counted on my silence because I was family and because women are so often trained to confuse discretion with dignity. The part that satisfied people most was the part I had the least to do with. Once the story broke, others began speaking. A former product lead described Ryan's habit of borrowing frameworks in meetings and reframing them as executive synthesis. A compliance director detailed how female staff were routinely asked to be more collaborative when they challenged attribution. A junior engineer sent Tessa old Slack screenshots where Ryan referred to me as founder era, brilliant, but too emotionally rigid for scale. There is nothing more dangerous to a polished fraud than a microphone handed to patterns. By New Year's week, Ryan was no longer a misunderstood executive under pressure. He was becoming what he had always feared most, a cautionary example. His personal life split open almost as fast. His wife, Elise, moved out of their condo in Chicago with their son after lawyers began calling the house. She later sent me a short message I still think about. "I'm sorry I ever believed the version of you I was given." My parents, who had spent years treating Ryan's ambition like evidence of destiny, suddenly found themselves uninvited from the very circles they had used him to impress. Friends who once praised his drive now called him reckless. Men my father had boasted to on golf courses stopped returning texts. My mother's Christmas photos disappeared from her account. That part should not have mattered to me, but I would be lying if I said I felt nothing watching the social architecture they prized more than honesty crack under the weight of actual facts. And yet the story did not become simple. Fingard announced layoffs in the second week of January. Not total collapse, but enough to turn celebration into ash in my throat. These were not the people who had stolen from me. Many had done good work under bad leadership. I spent 2 straight days on calls with my co-founders at Ledger North, creating a priority hiring track for displaced Fingard staff in engineering, regulatory analysis, and client infrastructure. We could not save everyone. That haunted me. But we moved quickly enough to bring over 11 people within the month, including one single mother in Milwaukee who called me crying after signing her offer because she had been sure she would lose her home. That was when the real emotional cost arrived. Not from Ryan, not from my parents, from the bystanders, the people standing in the spray when the vessel finally shattered. I had known that truth would wound more than the liar. Knowing it in theory is not the same as reading messages from people whose rent suddenly became uncertain. I helped where I could. Letters, introductions, referrals, direct bridge payments in 2 cases through a quiet hardship fund we set up without publicity. Some nights, though, I still lay awake wondering whether there had been a version of justice that spared more people. I do not think there was. But uncertainty is part of the price of conscience. Anyone who tells you revenge feels clean has never had one that mattered. Ryan called me again 2 weeks after New Year's. For the first time in his life, he did not sound strategic. He sounded stripped. He had resigned by then, effective immediately, with the board preparing to pursue recoupment actions tied to compensation and misrepresentation exposure. He told me he had sold the condo, told me Elise had filed for separation, told me our parents were devastated. Then he said the line I had waited years to hear and found no joy in hearing. "I knew you would stay quiet because you always protected the family more than I did." I did not respond for several seconds. Finally, I said, "No, Ryan. I protected the illusion longer than I should have." He cried after that. Actual crying, not performance. I listened, because I wanted to know whether remorse sounded different from collapse. It did. Remorse is less interested in being comforted. He said he had spent his whole adult life feeling like the room changed when I entered it, like my competence took oxygen from his ambition. "Then, you should have built your own air," I said, "not learned to breathe through my lungs." By February, the lawsuits were real. Fingard reached confidential settlements with several parties. Ryan faced separate civil exposure. His name, once introduced with admiration, now carried the peculiar silence reserved for people who made themselves radioactive in elite circles. My parents wanted family reconciliation immediately, of course. Disaster always makes enablers crave quick ceremony. My mother left crying voicemails about how none of this had been worth losing each other. My father asked whether public victory had made me happy. I never answered that question directly because happiness had never been the point. The point was that I would not die watching someone else wear my life like a suit tailored for him. Success arrived faster than healing, which is another truth people rarely advertise. Ledger North grew because the engine worked, because clients responded to accuracy, because trust still has market value when it is offered before marketing language gets to it. By spring, we had signed regional banking groups in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Illinois. By summer, we were in talks with a national credit infrastructure partner. My face appeared in magazines I never used to read. Panels invited me to speak about women in fintech, founder invisibility, ethics in scaling innovation. And everywhere I went, some version of the same confession found me. A woman in compliance whose male manager kept presenting her work as team refinement. A 53-year-old data architect told she was brilliant, but no longer client-facing enough to lead. A founder pushed out of her own company after teaching her younger co-executive everything he needed to displace her. My story stopped belonging only to me. That was both burden and balm. But private life moved more slowly. Ryan did not rebound. He relocated to Milwaukee, rented a one-bedroom apartment above a dental office, and took an entry-level operations role at a mid-sized logistics software company where no one cared who his sister was. He texted me once after his first day. I spent 8 hours updating dashboards for a man who is 28. I wrote back, "Good. Learn something." That became the shape of our contact for a while. Sparse, honest, no performance. He started therapy twice a week. I only know because he told me himself, awkwardly, like confession, without expectation. He said the therapist asked him why admiration mattered more to him than integrity. He said he did not have a good answer. I believed him. My parents were harder. Shame made them sentimental, and sentimentality is often just denial in nicer clothing. They wanted brunches, long talks, holidays restored, photos to prove survival. I refused all staged tenderness. I met them once in April at a quiet restaurant in Madison and said what should have been obvious years earlier. The reason this feels tragic to you now is because the humiliation is visible. The harm was visible to me the entire time. My father stared at his hands for most of that conversation. My mother cried halfway through and asked if I could at least admit they had been manipulated too. That was when I finally said something I had swallowed for a decade. Being easy to manipulate is not the same as being innocent when the manipulation benefits you. She did not know what to do with that sentence. Neither did he. And still, despite everything, life kept layering tenderness into the spaces destruction had emptied. My niece, Emma, found her way back to me first. She was 13 by then, old enough to notice who vanished from family stories and smart enough to question why. One Saturday in June, I received a handwritten note in the mail. No return address, same as years before when she used to send drawings secretly. Inside was a folded page that said, "I don't think you were the problem. I miss you. If I text you, will that make things worse?" I sat at my kitchen table with that note and cried harder than I had the night the article went live. Not because it broke me, but because it proved some thread had survived. I texted the number she tucked at the bottom. She replied within 30 seconds. We started slowly. Music, school, books, sarcastic observations about adults. Eventually, she told me Ryan had apologized to her too. Not for the scandal itself at first, but for teaching her, without meaning to, that love in our family was something you earned by being useful to the loudest person in the room. That sentence stayed with me. Maybe because it named my childhood too. By late summer, Emma was spending one Saturday a month with me in Madison. We baked, walked the farmer's market, argued about movies, and carefully avoided turning every visit into a moral lesson. Sometimes repair begins only when you stop using people as witnesses for your pain. She once looked at me over coffee and asked, "Do you hate him?" Meaning Ryan. I thought for a long time before answering. "No," I said. "I hate what he practiced until it became his reflex." She nodded like that made immediate sense. Professionally, I tried to convert what had happened to me into structure, not myth. At Ledger North, every major contribution was logged visibly. Attribution protocols were formalized. Promotion panels required documented evidence, not only executive narrative. Mentorship for women over 40 was not a side initiative, it was built into leadership expectations. I was not interested in becoming one more woman celebrated for surviving a machine she then leaves unchanged for others. If the story had meaning, it had to become policy somewhere. Still, there were nights the loneliness returned without warning. Not the loneliness of exclusion anymore, but the loneliness of becoming the person who told the truth and then had to live as the embodiment of it. People started calling me brave as if bravery were an aesthetic instead of a wound that calcified correctly. On those nights, I would look at the old photo from years before, everyone flower-streaked and smiling around my kitchen island, and let myself grieve, not because I wanted that exact family back, but because I had once worked so hard to deserve something no one should have to audition for: love, credit, place, home. Time does not heal everything. What it does, if you're lucky, is separate your worth from the hands that mismeasured it. The next Christmas came with less drama and more truth, which turned out to be harder in some ways and gentler in others. I did not go to my parents' house on Christmas Eve. No one asked me to. That was progress. Instead, I hosted dinner at my apartment in Madison for a small, chosen group. 2 early Ledger North employees, 1 former Finguard analyst who had rebuilt beautifully after the layoffs, Emma, and later in the evening, after much discussion and no ceremony, Ryan. Not because everything was repaired, not because he had earned restoration in 1 year. Simply because some consequences are served best not by exile, but by proximity to the life you damaged and no longer control. He arrived with a pie from a bakery down the street and the careful posture of a man who had finally learned that entrance is a privilege, not a birthright. He looked older, not ruined, just weathered. Less polished around the eyes. He hugged Emma first, then stood awkwardly in my doorway until I stepped aside. "Come in," I said. No music swelled. No miracle happened. He helped set the table. He asked where I kept the serving spoons. He listened more than he spoke. At one point, he laughed at something Emma said, then immediately looked guilty for laughing too easily. I understood that feeling better than he knew. When family has been broken properly, even joy enters the room cautiously. After dinner, while the others cleared plates, Ryan and I ended up alone by the balcony window for the first time in months. Snow was falling again, almost exactly like the year before. He asked me whether I ever wished I had handled it privately. One last attempt to understand the disaster from the inside. I told him the truth. "I wish you had given me a private solution when I begged for one." He nodded once, eyes on the glass. Then he said, "I'm beginning to understand that I didn't just steal work, I stole context. I made everyone think your value was optional." That was the most honest sentence he had ever spoken to me. More honest in some ways than I'm sorry. I answered, "Yes, and rebuilding after that takes longer than public disgrace." He said, "I know." For once, I thought he might actually mean it. My parents came on Christmas Day for coffee only. 1 hour, no photos, no talk of putting the past behind us. My mother brought an awkward poinsettia and my father brought nothing, which felt almost more appropriate. They sat on my couch like visitors in a house they had once assumed would always be theirs emotionally. We spoke about Emma's school, the weather in Florida, the expansion of Ledger North. Then my father did something I never expected. He looked at Ryan, then at me, and said, "I confused charisma with character." He did not dress it up. He did not ask to be comforted. It was not enough to erase anything, but it was the first adult sentence I had heard from him in years. My mother cried quietly beside him but did not interrupt. That restraint from her was its own small revolution. When they left, Emma stayed behind to help me clean up. She asked whether this was what forgiveness looked like. I told her forgiveness is not a door. It is a set of boundaries that stop requiring blood every time you touch them. She thought about that while drying plates, then said, "So maybe it's not warm yet, but it's not dangerous in the same way." I smiled because 13-year-olds sometimes speak with more precision than adults in therapy. "Exactly," I said. "I am telling this story now because too many people still confuse family loyalty with self-erasure. They think if the person hurting you shares your blood, your silence becomes noble. It doesn't. It becomes useful to the wrong people. The lesson I learned too late is not that you should destroy everyone who betrays you. It is that you must document reality before someone louder edits it. Protect your ideas. Protect your name. Protect the version of yourself that knows what happened even when everyone else seems more comfortable with the counterfeit story. And if the person trying to make you small is your brother, your parent, your spouse, your boss, anyone, remember this. Love that requires your invisibility is not love. It is appetite. Ryan still has years of work ahead of him. My parents still carry the shame of what they enabled. I still have mornings when I wake from old dreams and have to remember that I no longer live inside their version of me. But I also have a company with my name on it, a niece who texts me terrible memes at midnight, work that saves other people from getting swallowed whole, and a life that no longer depends on being welcomed into rooms built on my own disappearance. So if you've ever been treated like the difficult one simply because you refuse to vanish, listen to me carefully. You are not too much. You are not bitter for remembering. You are not cruel for drawing a line where someone else kept drawing from you. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop protecting people from the consequences of what they chose to do in broad daylight. If someone you loved built their comfort out of your silence, and one day you finally told the truth, would you regret the fire, or would you regret waiting so long to strike the match?
Thank you for being here until the final sense. All situations in this video are fictional and made only for dramatic storytelling, entertainment, and reflection. We hope the story reminds you that when people show you repeated disrespect, you do not need to keep proving your loyalty. You are allowed to choose yourself before the behavior completely drains you.